This graham cracker crust recipe is easy. Whether you want to use it for a cheesecake, key lime pie, lemon icebox pie, or some other dessert, once you learn how to make graham cracker crust from scratch, you will never go back to store-bought because, as always, homemade is best. Here I have 4.8 ounces or 142 grams of graham crackers. I know that sounds like an odd number, so let me be a bit more specific. This is the box of graham crackers that I'm using, 14.4 ounces. Inside of this box, there are 3 smaller packets. I am using one of the smaller packets. So if your box is bigger or smaller, do a little bit of math and you can figure out how many you will need for 4.8 ounces, which, as I said, for me is 142 grams. I'm also going to use 1 stick of butter, 3 tablespoons of sugar, a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon. I know that's a half teaspoon measurement. You could use half a teaspoon. I'll get to that in a minute, but I'm going to use a 1/4 teaspoon and 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. The first order of business is to grind up the graham crackers. If you have a food processor, you could definitely do that, but I am just going to take them out of the sleeve and put them into the plastic bag. Although I don't think it would hurt anything to break each individual graham cracker into 4 individual pieces, I'm just breaking them in half and then putting them into my plastic bag. Like I said, you could definitely use a food processor, but I am going to just put these into a plastic bag and use a rolling pin. If you're using a plastic bag, make sure that the bag is sealed and that the graham crackers, you don't want them to come up all the way to the top. You want to have a little bit of space for when you start pounding. And then just simply pound them until they look like breadcrumbs. My graham crackers are now crushed. It took maybe 3 to 5 minutes, but honestly, it's going to be well worth the effort because, like I said, there's nothing like a homemade graham cracker crust. The next step is to melt the butter. Here I have my 1 stick of butter. I cut it into tablespoons and I'm going to melt it in the microwave. My butter is now melted. I just put it in the microwave on high, uncovered, in intervals about 22 seconds. I think maybe a minute or so total. As you can see, my graham crackers are now in my, not really a bowl, but we'll call it a bowl. And I'm just going to simply add everything to the graham crackers. I'm going to add my melted butter, 1 stick, my 3 tablespoons of sugar, 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. And now I'm just going to mix everything together. You definitely could increase the cinnamon to half a teaspoon. I think if you really like cinnamon, you would like it, but if you're not a fan of cinnamon or you're afraid the cinnamon flavor would overpower the pie, then maybe just keep it at a 1/4 teaspoon. My graham crackers are already cinnamon flavored, but I wanted to give them even more cinnamon flavor. Honestly, I think it's kind of personal preference. If you've never made graham cracker pie crust before, I would do a 1/4 teaspoon just to see how it is, and then maybe at another time add half a teaspoon. Now that the graham crackers, butter, and everything are well combined, I am going to press the graham crackers into my pie plate. Here I have a 9-inch pie plate. I lightly grease it with butter, but honestly, I don't think it's necessary because this has so much butter already. And I'm just going to literally put it into the pie plate, and then I am going to mash it down with my hands. As you saw, I only use 3 tablespoons of sugar. Some recipes call for as much as a third of a cup, which honestly I think is kind of a bit much because I want the graham cracker crust to be sweet, but I don't want it to be overpoweringly so. So I think 3 tablespoons is plenty. You might also want to try brown sugar. That's something you could do. Also, I'm curious about how lemon zest would work in this because I like lemon and cinnamon together. So I'm guessing it would be good. If you want to use something like this, maybe a glass, instead of touching it with your fingers, I think that's an option. And if you see it starting to come up there, just take a small knife and cut it off like that and try to push it into areas where you need a little bit more. Do you have to bake a graham cracker crust? It depends. The short answer is no, you don't. But if you want it to stick together and hold its shape better, then yes, you should bake it. Because if you bake it, the sugar will melt and it will, once it hardens again, it will hold everything together really well. But if you just put this into the refrigerator, the butter will harden again. And in the refrigerator, butter is hard, right? So it will form a crust, but your graham cracker crust will not be as firm. It won't hold together as nicely when you cut it if it's refrigerated versus baked. So I'm going to bake mine at 375 for 7 to 10 minutes. My graham cracker pie crust is now ready for the oven. Another thing you can do to shape it is to take some fingers here and press upwards while you have your thumb or some other fingers here and press downwards. That way you can get a nice top edge. Like I said, it's going to go in at 375 for 7 to 10 minutes. Going to be spectacular. My graham cracker crust just came out of the oven. It was in at 375 uncovered for 10 full minutes. It looks a bit wet in the middle, but as it cools, it will harden. This graham cracker crust recipe was amazing. If taste is what is most important to you, then this is the best. In my opinion, it had the perfect balance of flavors. It was sweet, but not too sweet, buttery, and the hint of cinnamon is what really put it over the top and made it truly exceptional. Although the middle of my crust wasn't quite as smooth as I would have liked, I think it was because after I finished shaping the graham cracker crust in the pie plate, I drizzled a little bit of the leftover butter that was stuck in the bowl in which I had melted the butter in the microwave. I think the bit of extra moisture did something to it. That slight aesthetic imperfection aside, it turned out phenomenal. Like I said earlier, I would like to experiment a bit more with this graham cracker crust recipe, maybe adding more cinnamon, half a teaspoon, maybe some lemon zest, maybe even a bit of ginger. I'm also curious to see how brown sugar would change this recipe. As you have already seen, I used this recipe to make the crust for my no-bake cheesecake. And I also used it as the base for my banana and caramel banoffee pie. Honestly, however you want to use this graham cracker crust recipe, I'm sure that it will be absolutely delicious. Once you try this recipe, I promise you that this will become your go-to graham cracker crust recipe. I'll definitely be using this pie crust again and again in the future, so stay tuned for more. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.